Why is it that when people ask you if you're a Christian, you don't really answer it like straightforward, like, yeah, I follow Jesus Christ, I'm a Christian?
Here's my take. Jordan Peterson doesn't believe in Christianity the way most people believe in Christianity, let alone the fact that he doesn't believe in the way most people today understand the word belief. This will be the topic of my video. Bear with me as I glance over to my notes to help me with the video. In this video, I intend to discuss Jordan Peterson's notorious conception or theory of belief, and talk through some of the good and problematic things I see with it from a philosophical and Christian perspective. Peterson is notorious for asking seemingly pesky questions, like he's trying to avoid answering the question or overcomplicating the discussion. Questions like, what do you mean by believe, or God, or fill in the blank?
They ask things that, do you believe in God? And I don't answer that question because I don't know what the hell you mean by the question. What does believe mean?
As someone pursuing a master's degree in philosophy, I understand and can appreciate his desire to define his terms, since doing so is critical to having a productive and meaningful conversation. Literally, understanding each other is the bedrock of any profitable conversation. And honestly, I think he does it for two reasons. Primarily is because he himself probably doesn't fully know what those words mean, and he's genuinely trying to find out.
When people say too that they're a Christian, I actually generally don't really know what they mean.
But secondly, I think he's trying to play something like a Socrates and instigating that internal dialogue in the person he's talking to. So although it may seem annoying, it's actually a good thing to be doing that. Now, what does Peterson think it means to believe? First, we have to remember that Peterson is a behavioral psychologist. His journey amongst popular Christian circles started out by trying to help people understand the psychological significance of the biblical stories. By training, Peterson is neither a theologian nor a philosopher, although he acts very much like a philosopher, and at the end of the day, everybody is something of a philosopher. But he's a clinical psychologist, and from what I understand, a behavioral psychologist primarily. And as a behavioral psychologist, Peterson defines belief from a behaviorist perspective. This isn't to undermine Peterson's contribution to the discussion of the Christian faith either, but it's really important to remember that his input into the conversation and his reading of the scriptures come from this philosophical, psychological background. And so does the meaning he draws from the text and the way he understands the Christian tradition, capital T. In the same way he draws meaning out of stories like Pinocchio and Snow White, or whatever it may be, he's doing a similar thing with the biblical stories. He's a behaviorist, or at least strongly influenced by behaviorist tradition. And behaviorists understand belief as more or less identical with your actions. Belief is what you do. Behaviorists are concerned with your behaviors and actions. This is why Peterson is always advising people to watch people like a hawk, a spouse, a friend, an enemy, whatever it may be. Watch their behavior, because that will tell you more about what they believe, who they are, what they want, over and above what they might say. As far as I can tell, talk of belief and talk of action are synonymous on the behaviorist view. These are interchangeable. What you believe is what you do. Peterson has been saying this all the time actually when people ask him, although it may not always be clear. So on the behaviorist tradition, what you believe is what you do, and as far as I can tell, you can't do what you don't believe. Therefore, my actions or behavior reveals my beliefs. For example, as a Christian, in a moment of falling into temptation or sin, I would cease to believe that I should not steal, or murder, or curse, or have sex outside of marriage, etc. In that particular moment of my sin, at that time, Peterson would say, clearly you don't believe that stealing is wrong, because you just went and stole that from the store. So at one moment, I can believe that stealing is wrong, and that I shouldn't do it, while in another, I might cease to believe that it is wrong. And this would be revealed by my actions. But I cannot be both believing that sin is wrong and actively sinning, in the same sense of my words and at the same time. I cannot both believe that stealing is wrong and be stealing at the same time. That's impossible on behaviorism, and it's because that's how they define and conceive of what belief is. It comes down to the relationship between belief and action, or belief and behavior. So our question now has to be, do we think this action-based definition of belief is the right definition? A good one? Is that what we think it means to believe? In opposition to this behaviorist conception is one that might say, I can believe in God and believe that my friend is trustworthy, but can also fail to act accordingly sometimes. This is a more common definition of belief. But to summarize a bit of what I see Peterson's theory of belief to be, he would say your belief is identified by what you act out in the world. Another way to put it is your beliefs are what animate your being or your existence. People don't necessarily believe what they say they believe. Rather, listen closely, they believe whatever statement accurately describes their action at that time. So for it to be true that Jordan Peterson believes in God, it must be the case that Jordan Peterson acts in accordance with the proposition, believe in God, whatever that means.
People think it's obvious. They ask things that, do you believe in God? I don't know what the hell you mean by the question. There isn't a more difficult question than that. What does believe mean?
So ask yourself, what does it mean to act as though someone believes in God? It's not just as simple as praying and going to church and helping others. In response to whether Peterson believes in God, he often says, I act as though God exists. I live as though God exists. In other words, his actions are in accordance with the proposition God exists, or as best as he can make his actions in accordance with that proposition. Now, whatever it means for God to exist is obviously super loaded and not just a simple statement. A more common or popular definition of belief is something like assent to a proposition, where assent means holding that proposition to be true, or approving of it, accepting it, agreeing with it. And proposition is just any statement. For example, that the sky is blue, that God exists, that there is a door in front of me, that I'm talking to a camera right now. Also, typically we think belief is something that's stable, reliable for a period of time. People don't just change their beliefs from one moment to another, but they have beliefs for a prolonged period of time, although those can change in a moment. We also don't think of it as being very strongly attached to our actions. It's possible for us to act in ways that are not in accord with what we say we believe. Now, as a Christian myself, I actually think Peterson is onto something here, and I think his definition has a few virtues. I'm now going to discuss a couple virtues and problems I see with his view. First, I think it's important that we do remember that the relationship between our actions and what we say we believe is important, and Peterson has done a lot to try to emphasize that. Virtue number one, it's intuitive. Everyone would agree with some sense of the definition. For instance, if my boss tells me she believes and trusts me that I will accomplish some assignment by the end of the week, but turns around and gets another employee to work on the same project, it seems right for me to say that my boss didn't actually believe that I would do the task when she professed belief. Rather, she believes me when she does what she says she believes. So here the behavior seems more fundamental to belief than the sheer words spoken. This is why Peterson is so against the idea of mere profession, confession, or verbal declaration of belief as true belief.
Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, right? So be careful what you claim.
He doesn't think belief can just be a mere confession and verbal statement, because part of the behaviorist view is that your mental states are not empirically verifiable. I can't look into your mind and see the belief John believes in God. Your mental states are not observable to me as a third person. And obviously, second, confession is not a reliable method. Anybody could just lie. And even if they don't know that they're lying, they could still be saying something that isn't true. A true, accurate description of their intentions, beliefs, desires.
What do you classify yourself as? If Jesus came down right now, would you be his son? Or would you be somebody who's studying Jesus?
What do you think?
So it seems we intuitively make this connection between someone's belief and their actions. Like if someone tells you they believe in Christianity but attend their local mosque regularly and you never see them at church, and they don't pray or do anything remotely associated with being a Christian, you might justifiably think they weren't telling the truth. Therefore, belief does seem connected to action in some real and empirical sense. Virtue number two, I think his definition helps us understand the relationship between faith and works, which is an age-old debate between Christian denominations. The Bible passage, faith without works is dead, becomes much more intelligible, clear, or understandable when we take the connection between belief and action to be closer to what Peterson and this behavioral definition describes. And Protestants, who tend to emphasize salvation by faith alone, still recognize that a true faith leads to behavioral changes. All denominations believe that the fruit, actions, or products of a tree will identify its kind. We will be known by our fruits. For these reasons, I can appreciate Peterson's definition, but there are some important issues with it from a Christian theological perspective. First, Christianity seems to make a big deal about verbal confession of faith. Verbal confession seems to be an important feature of true belief. For instance, scriptures like Romans 10:9 through 10. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. Or Matthew 10:32 to 33. Whoever acknowledges me before others, this is Jesus speaking, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Thus, it's obviously important to make this confession of faith, belief, clear and open. Martyrs died and were brutally murdered because they would not worship or confess allegiance to other gods. Peter is chastised in the Gospels for denying Christ, and that's something we see Peterson doing explicitly in the Jubilee video. So why is Peterson denying? Is that enough to say he's not a Christian? Well, I don't know. I don't think so, but that's maybe for another video. But if Peterson is doing away with verbal confession, it seems he's missing something central to traditional Christianity, and this might exclude him from Orthodox Christianity or correct Christian belief. But then again, it can't only be verbal confession, something Peterson stresses, because anyone can lie or deceive themselves, and we see that in Matthew 7. Next, on Peterson's definition, you cannot believe something and fail to act in accordance with it. But this doesn't seem to work well with the idea of Christians being sinners, making a profession of faith and failing to act in accordance with that expectation. This is something explicitly said in many confessions of higher ecclesial churches. As I discussed earlier, a common definition of belief doesn't have this intimate connection with behavior where both must always align. It seems most people are willing to grant that someone may believe X but fail to act in accordance with X at times, but maybe not all the time, just like our Christian friend who attends mosque all the time and never shows any signs of being a Christian. Christians at least take being a Christian and a sinner to be compatible. It's kind of a fundamental to the faith. There isn't one Christian who isn't a sinner. I think it's fair to say that, at least for some Christians, they seem to believe that the conjunction of true belief and sin is A, certainly possible, B, often occurring, but C, it's still definitely not the goal. The two then are not mutually exclusive like the behaviorist might think. This then seems incompatible with an Orthodox Christian worldview or theology. Now, obviously, this does depend on what it might mean to be a Christian. Is it someone who's perfectly like Christ, or is it someone on the way to being like Christ? These may have implications. The popular understanding of belief seems to warrant someone misstepping. It seems right to say our beliefs don't always line up with our actions. It might also be worthwhile saying that, is verbal confession a kind of action in itself? In the video, Peterson does say that you can make confession a kind of action. Therefore, Peterson shouldn't be totally disregarding verbal confession. It could be that the behavior of a true believer is to publicly proclaim their faith, or that saying, I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, is a necessary but not sufficient condition for being a true believer. At the end of the day, we wouldn't expect a non-believer in Christianity to proclaim that Jesus is their Lord and Savior. That wouldn't be the expected behavior given someone's atheism, for example. Importantly here, I think Peterson is highlighting the importance of your actions aligning with what you say, and that's certainly something that a lot of Christians should be reminded of. So here's my working definition of belief. Faith, verbal confession, personal assent or taking some proposition to be true, and works, behavioral changes and alignment with those propositions, or Christ. Now, I didn't say anything too special here because this is compatible with the traditional and Orthodox Christianity. All Christians believe that faith in Christ changes you, heart and mind, thoughts, words, and deeds. Now, Peterson made a big deal about calling himself a Christian, and this is what made that Jubilee video go viral. Obviously, this may alarm most Christians. Why are you denying Christ? If you deny me before man, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. Well, let's be charitable to Peterson. I can understand his sentiment to a certain degree, and actually, there's another famous philosopher who might have had a similar take on the issue, but I'll discuss this in a short other video that I'll link somewhere. Now, I used to be heavily influenced by Jordan Peterson back in high school and early college. I borderline idolized him for some time. His allegorical, psychological, symbolic style of interpreting the scriptures actually started worrying me that what I believed about Christianity wasn't actually true. Is Christianity just a cosmic myth? Is it just about the patterns and archetypes in the Bible and how they reflect real patterns in life? Maybe resurrection was just the hero's journey arc. Maybe there isn't an actual afterlife. These questions kind of worried me, but I've since come to certain thoughts that have reaffirmed for me why Christianity is true and not just a cosmic myth. If you want to hear those thoughts, I'll address them in another video somewhere linked. So it all comes down to this. Is belief understood as what you do? Is it what you think to be true? Can it be both? Or is it none of the above? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, share it with a friend. Maybe it sparks a conversation. I hope it was enlightening, maybe offered a different perspective, and helped illuminate this heated dialogue that's been going on around Jordan Peterson and his Christian faith. Like the video and let me know your comments below. Also, feel free to subscribe. I appreciate it.
What does believe mean? Does it mean you go to the cross willingly? And if that's what it meant, would you say that you believe? Because that's what it means.